Today, patient-centered care with Sonali Acharya, PharmD, the role of specialty pharmacy. And we have a full bio for Dr. Acharya, but as usual, we're going to jump right into our top five. So Sonali Acharya, PharmD, has absolutely loved being part of the health system-based specialty pharmacy with a focus on oncology for the past 5 years. Number 4, she enjoys working with a team to research patient-specific clinical outcomes and adherence to oral oncology medications. Number 3, she went outside the box and worked at a CRO within the Safety Aggregate Reporting and Analytics Group. They authored periodic reports for submission to appropriate health authorities globally. Number 2, within 6 months of graduating, she was in the pick for a very busy clinical pharmacy in a 24-hour store in North Philadelphia. Let's just say there were a lot of interesting stories. And number 1, received PharmD from the University of Georgia College of Pharmacy. Go Dogs. Dr. Acharya, thank you so much for being with us here today. What's something we should know outside of your professional bio there?
Yeah, so I actually, I love to travel. I've been to several different countries and I have plenty on my bucket list. So I would say that I would say I work to definitely gain knowledge, but also so that I can enjoy traveling.
Great. And which one do you hope to go to next?
So we're actually currently, my next trip is to Paris is what we're planning currently. So we'll see if that comes true.
Wow, that sounds great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I mentioned Poll Everywhere earlier. So the first question, which as our regular viewers know is always kind of a softball, is just to get us started. So specialty pharmacies provide medications for people living with serious health conditions requiring complex therapies, true or false. And while you're thinking about that, there's our ACCME disclosure and there's our ANCC disclosure. And now let's get back to our question. Again, for our audience, these are all anonymous. Looks like we're trending heavily on true, 100% on true. Dr. Acharya, how are they doing?
Doing quite well.
Great. Well, everyone hopefully has the hang of Poll Everywhere now. So unlocking the power of specialty pharmacy, transforming healthcare. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the introduction. Again, just a little bit more about myself. I am Sonali Acharya, and I do have a BS in biology and microbiology from the University of Georgia. I continued there and got my PharmD as well from the University of Georgia College of Pharmacy. Have been in the Carolinas now for over 19 years, probably closer to 20, with my husband and 3 kids, and we absolutely love it here. As far as work experience, I do have significant community pharmacy experience, as I mentioned, a little bit of CRO. And then recently, or most currently, I've been employed by the UNC Shared Services Specialty Pharmacy. And there, my focus involves basically hematology and oncology care. As I mentioned, outside of work, I do love to travel. I like to spend time with my family, my friends. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about me. Next. So to kind of dive into it, our learning objectives for today, we're going to go through and describe the key players and services offered by specialty pharmacists. We're going to define specialty pharmacy and why specialty pharmacy matters. We'll go on to define the role that specialty pharmacy plays in patient-centered care and on patient outcomes. Finally, we'll discuss the challenges and some future trends in specialty pharmacy. And hopefully at the end, we'll have some time left over for some Q&A. Next. So we're going to jump right into it with our first Poll Anywhere question. So the first question is, which of the following organizations is not an accrediting body for specialty pharmacy? A, URAC, B, Accreditation Commission for Healthcare, or the ACHC, C, Center for Pharmacy Practice Accreditation, or CPPA, D, the Universal Accreditation Commission for Specialty Pharmacy, or E, all of the above are accrediting bodies for specialty pharmacy. And I'll just give you a few seconds here to kind of finalize your answers. So this one, I don't know if the polls are in.
I think that's long enough, and it looks like you've got good responses there.
Yeah, and it seems to be, and this was, I'll blame myself, it was a little bit of a trick question, but whoever answered D, you are correct. That is completely made up. That is not an accrediting body. But all the other three, they are definitely accrediting bodies that, you know, specialty pharmacies get accreditation from. So a specialty pharmacy, we're going to kind of jump into the next slide, but can specialty pharmacy truly be defined? Well, a specialty pharmacy is a state licensed pharmacy. It solely or largely provides medications for patients living with serious health conditions that require complex therapies. For example, cancer-directed treatment, we have infectious disease, HIV, AIDS, hepatitis, multiple sclerosis, organ transplant, autoimmune and inflammatory disease states like RA, just to name a few. But along with being state licensed and regulated, specialty pharmacies are accredited, or at least in the process of becoming accredited, by independent third parties. And as in the poll anywhere question, these parties, the top four kind of listed here, there are a few others, but URAC accreditation, Accreditation Commission for Healthcare, or the ACHC, Center for Pharmacy Practice Accreditation, the CPPA, and Joint Commission are all bodies of accreditation. There, like I mentioned, there are a few others. I believe NABP has one as well. But these are sort of the top four that are usually provide the accreditation. So along with the accreditation, specialty pharmacy encompasses the provision of specialty pharmaceuticals, which typically require unique fulfillment and patient care support services. Before we go into that, let's talk a little bit about the accreditation. So next slide. So accreditation demonstrates the commitment to quality, safety, accountability, and adoption of nationally recognized standards of practice. So in here, as I mentioned, URAC is considered the gold standard of accreditation for specialty pharmacy, and it covers drug-drug interactions, call center performance, dispensing accuracy, distribution accuracy, and prescription turnaround time. If you look on the chart to the right, it's a little tiny. I couldn't get any bigger, I apologize. But it goes over the general areas of evaluation for each of the four pharmacy accrediting bodies that we talked about. For URAC, since that is sort of the gold standard, it looks over the areas that evaluation include organizational management, regulatory compliance, quality management, customer service, pharmacy operations, patient management, and measures reporting, or like outcomes measures reporting. If you notice here, the timeline, if you can tell, is a little bit different. But when we talk about timeline for accreditation, we're talking about the minimum time from submission of initial application to the time it takes for the accreditation decision to be finalized. URAC has probably the longest timeline. It can take anywhere between 9 months to 12 months, with ACHC being the shortest, and it looks like its timeline is about 3 months. That being said, the accreditation does need to be renewed every 3 years. So once you are accredited, you have 3 years, and then you do have to go through the accreditation process again. So the reason for accreditation, accreditation ensures compliance with healthcare's most comprehensive and rigorous standards. It requires specialty pharmacies to continually measure, monitor, and evaluate the services they provide. And importantly, it also benefits the patients directly because having this accountability. Next slide. Here you can see the growth of accreditation. So if you look, you can see the number of unique pharmacy locations that are accredited by at least one, if not more than one, accrediting body. This graph specifically focuses on ACHC and URAC accreditation, but in 2015, you can tell there are 378 unique pharmacies that were accredited by either or both. You can tell it significantly, proportionately increased over the next couple of years, but the trend is still for more and more pharmacies, especially the specialty pharmacies, to get accredited. The rationale behind that we'll discuss in a little bit more detail as the presentation continues, but it is something that payers and manufacturers are looking for. Okay, next slide. So we talked about accreditation. Now, what exactly is specialty pharmacy? So initially I did mention that specialty pharmacy has some unique fulfillment elements included. So these include coordination of care and facilitating drug access to limited distribution specialty pharmaceuticals. It includes facilitating mail order delivery logistics as well, negotiating payer contracts, maintaining cold chain distribution, dispensing and tracking a significant number of products requiring risk evaluation and mitigation strategies, are also known more commonly as our REMS drugs. The fulfillment elements also include accounts receivable support and management, as well as program accreditation management and the development of program marketing materials. Next slide. Along with the fulfillment, specialty pharmacies also need technical and clinical patient care support services as well. These include excuse me. These include benefits investigation, prior authorization, and patient assistance programs. They also include call center development, staffing, and monitoring, as well as case management, which may include development of protocols and disease state management at a minimum. Also, product device training is also part of it. For example, our self-administered injections, like our pegfilgrastim, they require special specific storage, goes with refrigeration. Also, the administration techniques are important for patients to be able to understand. Finally, data management of technical and clinical patient care services is also included with specialty pharmacy. Next slide. So to kind of keep going on, what are some characteristics of specialty pharmaceuticals? So obviously the high cost, typically defined as having a cost of over $600 for a month's supply. But as most of us are aware, these prices can go into the thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars per month or per fill. Also, they involve complex treatment regimens that require ongoing clinical monitoring and patient education. For example, many cancer-directed regimens require either cyclic dosing or require a multiple medication regimen that requires medications to be taken on separate days, which can easily confuse patients. The medications also have special handling, storage, or delivery requirements. And due to the molecular complexity of these specialty medications, Sometimes the special handling involves several steps. It can be when technicians or pharmacists are preparing these medications. They often are required or highly advised to wear, gloves when handling medication or other protective gear. The medication may also be temperature sensitive and require special handling through the shipping process. For example, refrigeration or freeze protection. In addition to these specialty pharmaceuticals are also increased potential for what we call limited drug distribution. Now, limited drug distribution, what that does is in this network, a manufacturer contracts with one or maybe a few specialty pharmacies to dispense medications that treat very rare diseases and that require close patient supervision. The specialty pharmacies are selected based on certain criteria, such as clinical expertise, patient support, special documentation, including compliance and side effect monitoring, the ability to provide risk evaluations and outcomes data as well. The manufacturers, they want to ensure that their patients are receiving their medications and they're receiving the best possible care as well that the pharmacy can provide. Other things, payers may restrict drug access. This is usually done by covering a specialty medication only if it is filled at a specialty pharmacy of their designation, quote unquote, the preferred pharmacy that many of us hear about. Also, these medications are dispensed to treat individuals with rare diseases, as we've mentioned previously. And they also treat diseases or conditions that are marked by long-term or severe symptoms, side effects, or even potential increased fatality. Okay, next slide. So we kind of talked about what specialty pharmacy is, but why does specialty pharmacy matter? So specialty pharmacy is a reliable distribution channel for high-cost medications. They offer lower costs while maximizing insurance reimbursements from those companies that cover the medication. They also incorporate disease state management programs. They have a highly trained pharmacy staff in the treatment of many chronic disease states, including oncology. And importantly, they offer convenience to the patient. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about a little bit more of the conveniences that are offered. So specialty pharmacies typically will have 24-hour access to a pharmacist. Typically that involves a pharmacist, covering online coverage, paging service. Specialty pharmacies help with benefits investigation for patients, as well as prior authorization assistance. They help with financial assistance, including copay cards, manufacturer assistance, and they also help with enrollment into these patient assistance programs. Also, communication and follow-up with the physician or the provider is also key. Patient education and medication adverse effect counseling, dispensing specialty pharmaceuticals, and shipping coordination. Also, proactive patient outreach for prescription refills and renewals, as well as adherence management, patient monitoring for safety and efficacy, and of course, payer and manufacturer reporting all fall under the specialty pharmacy umbrella. So now that we've discussed kind of what specialty pharmacy is and why it matters, we're going to kind of go on to talk about the key players in specialty pharmacy. Next slide. But before we do that, let's do another poll anywhere question. So which of the following are key players in a specialty pharmacy? A, pharmaceutical companies, B, the patients, C, the providers, D, the clinical staff, or E, all of the above. And I'll just give you all a few minutes to answer that question as well, or a few seconds. And it seems like most of you have already answered this. And yes, this is not a trick question this time, and that is correct. All of the above are definitely key players. Next slide. So as we mentioned, the specialty pharmacy is sort of at the core, and around it, we've got all of our players. We've got the patients, the providers, the pharmaceutical companies, the payers, and then, of course, the pipeline where the medication we get from, like our wholesalers and vendors. Next slide. So let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into each of the roles. So first, let's start off with patients. So specialty pharmacies offer support to their patients directly by patient education regarding treatment and side effects before and during the treatment. We also provide adherence monitoring and adverse effects management to address side effects. Next slide. After the patients, we have the prescriber. So once the medication is prescribed, providers want clear and efficient communication regarding the status of their patient's prescription. There's been a study done by Biologics that found that the average cancer patient saw multiple healthcare providers within a 1-year period. In these instances, it is essential to keep providers in the loop regarding their patients who are being treated for these chronic and complex conditions. Providers also want to know that their patients are receiving excellent care and that they'll be informed regarding that care and any issues that may arise. Also, communication is key, but unfortunately, communication is often fragmented in the healthcare setting, especially where fax machines and landlines are still used to communicate and coordinate care. Technology is improving information flow through electronic health records and health information exchanges. The healthcare technology is trending towards creating secure messaging platforms that are definitely HIPAA compliant and enable care teams to communicate with each other. Keeping providers in the communication loop is increasingly critical, especially as specialty pharmacy services continue to grow and expand. The next key player, or next slide, that we're going to talk about is the pharma or the manufacturer. Here, pharma plays a role in specialty pharmacy where basically specialty pharmacy can secure access to limited distribution contracts by showing these several factors. So first, they need to show and demonstrate that they have clinical expertise from a knowledgeable care team that can manage relationships between the patients, caregivers, prescribers, and payers. Manufacturers are also looking for specialty pharmacies that are accredited. And as I mentioned, multiple accreditation is actually preferred. Also, they're looking for technology to track and report financial, operational, and clinical outcomes. And they're looking for systems in place for medication handling, dispensing, and monitoring, along with clinical support for specialty diseases for the specific patient population. Next up, we have our payers. Next slide. As you can tell from this picture here, U.S. specialty drug spending has actually quadrupled. Back in 2012, as you can see from the slide, it was $87.1 billion was the projected spending. By 2020, it's definitely quadrupled to over $400 billion. And as medication costs rise, payers are looking to better manage their drug spending. They expect detailed tracking and reporting of financial, clinical, quality of life, and patient satisfaction scores. They're also looking for specialty pharmacies to be accredited, like I mentioned previously. And also due to value-based care, the pharmacies must show how their clinical services are impacting clinical, financial, quality of life, and patient satisfaction measures. So we've talked about a little bit of all the other key players in specialty pharmacy, but we haven't quite talked about the clinical staff. Next slide. So the clinical staff in specialty pharmacy, they include specialty trained patient care coordinators, pharmacy technicians, pharmacists, and in some models, they include nurses who all focus on specific disease states. The clinical staff are being tasked with more and more work in the specialty pharmacy space. This includes reviewing patients' health history, tracking lab values, tracking pathology and imaging studies, communicating with physicians on a patient's behalf, helping patients plan and manage symptoms through treatment, and translating complex medical terminology and answering patients' questions. Pharmacists who've been integrated into the clinical care roles have helped to reduce the burden on a lot of clinical staff. There is a specialty care model actually developed at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and that inserts pharmacists directly into the comprehensive management of patients on specialty medications. This model has not only reduced the demand on clinical staff, but also ensures that patient adherence, and it coordinates care in collaboration with providers through the use of EMR, or electronic medical records. So now that we've discussed the key players in specialty pharmacy, I want to go on to discuss sort of the impact of specialty pharmacy on patient outcomes. There have been several retrospective studies that have been done, and I'd like to go through a few of those to kind of show, like I said, the impact that we have. Next slide. So this first, the slide is a little busy, but this first retrospective case study, it was published in the Journal of Drug Assessment. It's a retrospective observational study used to measure the adherence to oncolytic and neurologic specialty medications provided by a specialty pharmacy. Their objective was to measure the adherence rate to the oncology and neurology specialty drugs dispensed by the specialty pharmacy using what we call proportion of days covered. So the proportion of days covered is basically, it looks at the proportion of days in which the person has access to the medication. The secondary objective was to compare the quality of life of patients who voluntarily participated in the specialty pharmacy provided medication therapy management program, or the SPMTM. They did a start of care assessment and then also a follow-up assessment. This one-year observational study of patient-reported outcomes was conducted at the specialty pharmacy among patients diagnosed, like I said, with various forms of cancer and neurological issues, and who had filled specialty prescriptions. There was a pharmacist that provided patient education. Each patient was offered medication therapy assessment at the start of care and then 7 days prior to each refill dispense. The assessment included 2 quality of life patient-reported outcomes metrics. The first one was the number of days of work or school missed, and the second was how have you been feeling on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being terrible and 10 being wonderful. So this data was captured monthly, and then it was annualized. The annualized means were then compared using the Mann-Whitney U-value, and then the proportion of days covered was calculated using the URAC PDC formula. So the results included there's 39,567 unique patients with an average of about 2 dispenses per patient. Out of those, 33,243 patients voluntarily participated in the program. And then out of those, 19,946 completed the start of care assessment. 3,324 completed the follow-up assessment, and 4,322 completed both. The overall mean annual PDC was calculated to be 0.962, which was compared then to the industry standard adherence rate of 80%. In their conclusion from this one-year study, it was determined that, one, the annualized PDC adherence rate of 0.96 was 20.25% higher than the industry standard of just 0.8 or 80%. The second thing was the number of days or work missed, the quality of life metric, was less after starting with a specialty drug with this specialty pharmacy medication therapy management program. And then thirdly, the how patients feel quality of life metric demonstrated that patients actually felt better after starting a specialty drug with this program. The improved adherence rate was associated with taking the specialty medication while participating in the specialty drug medication therapy management program. All right, the next study, or next slide. This was published in the Journal of Managed Care and Specialty Pharmacy, and it is a single-center retrospective cohort study comparing oral oncology medication adherence in patients when dispensing through an internal health system specialty pharmacy versus an external specialty pharmacy. So the objective, again, was to confirm the effect of an internal health system specialty pharmacy compared to the external on oncolytic adherence. And it was measured by, again, the proportion of days covered. Also, medication possession ratio. And what we talk about medication possession ratio, it's a ratio calculated as the ratio of the number of days that a patient is stopped for their medication to the number of days a patient should be stopped for their medication. And then also they looked at the time to treatment, which the time to treatment is basically the time from when the medication is prescribed to the time the patient receives the medication or the drug. So the method they used fill data was extracted from pharmacy claims databases and electronic medical records. For PDC and MPR, patients with at least 3 fills per oncolytic were included. All patients were included for the time to treatment analysis. They used chi-square or Fisher's exact test were used to analyze the categorical differences, and differences in continuous variables across pharmacy groups were evaluated using a Wilcoxon rank sum test. So for this, the result, there's 871 prescriptions that met the inclusion criteria. Out of those, 549 patients were included in the PDC and PR analysis, and 756 patients were included in the time to treatment analysis. The patients who filled at the internal health system specialty pharmacy definitely had a higher median PDC compared with the external. As you can see here, the health system specialty was 0.99 versus the external was 0.91. The adherence rate measured by the NPR was also higher for patients who use an internal health system specialty pharmacy versus the external. And then finally, the median time to treatment was lower for patients using the internal health system specialty pharmacy. And if you look at it, it was significantly lower with a 5-day turnaround time versus 27 days for external specialty pharmacies. The conclusion they came up with here was that internal health system specialty pharmacy services improved adherence as measured by the PDC and MPR. Also, significantly lower time to treatment was seen with the internal health system versus the external system pharmacy. Okay, next slide. So finally, this is the third case study that I wanted to talk about today. And this one is part of the Journal of Managed Care and Specialty Pharmacy. They published a multi-site retrospective cohort study across 7 health system specialty pharmacy sites to understand reasons behind primary medication non-adherence, or PMN, and how the health system specialty pharmacy model is uniquely positioned to positively impact these rates. The objective here was to evaluate the rate and reasons of primary medication non-adherence to specialty oncology medications in a health system specialty setting. Here, the patients were included if they had an orally self-administered oncology medication referral generated by the health system of the affiliated specialty pharmacy. Data was collected at each site using pharmacy software and electronic health records. They were de-identified and aggregated for analysis. They identified unfilled referrals within a 60-day refill window and then completed a retrospective chart review to identify the final referral outcomes and reasons for unfilled referrals. These referral outcomes were categorized as either unknown fill outcomes filled by the health system specialty pharmacy or not filled. The primary outcome was PMN for each PMN eligible referral, and secondary outcomes included reasons for PMN and time to fill. So the final PMN rate was calculated by dividing the number of unfilled referrals by total referrals with a known fill outcome. The result, almost 3,900 referrals, out of which 947 were PMN eligible. Out of those 947, 246 referrals had unknown fill outcomes. So that included either it was filled at through another method, another pharmacy, or if it was the prescription was for benefits investigation only and it did not require filling. Out of the 601, 69 out of 601 referrals with known outcomes were true instances of PMN, and the patient decision was actually the most common reason for not filling. The most referrals were filled by the health system specialty pharmacy, and the median time to fill after the initial referral was 5 days, which is similar or the same as the previous study that we looked at. So the conclusion here also is health system specialty pharmacies have a high percentage of patient initiation of new oral oncology medication treatments in a timely manner. The study found that 89% of patients who receive cancer medication from a health system specialty pharmacy start treatment. Also, if you look at the actual PMN or the actual primary medication non-adherence, there's only 11% at a health system specialty pharmacy versus the reported rate of 30% across Medicare beneficiaries. So over the 3 studies that we've talked about, there's definitely a significant impact of specialty pharmacy on patient outcomes, adherence, even just time to where therapy began. Next slide, please. So in 2010, a National Comprehensive Cancer Network Task Force report listed that the potential advantages of specialty pharmacy services, which include appropriate medication selection, increased adherence, avoidance of unnecessary drug costs, and increased patient and provider satisfaction. Additionally, disease state complexity and treatment toxicities highlight the need for integrated clinical and pharmacy services to ensure safe and efficient treatment while fostering better interdisciplinary collaboration. So now that we've talked a little bit about the impact of specialty pharmacy, I want to kind of discuss sort of the traditional versus specialty pharmacy model. Next slide, please. So as you can see here in this slide, traditional community pharmacy model, the pharmacies purchase medications from a wholesaler. After a prescription is received from a licensed prescriber, the pharmacist will dispense and provide patient information about the medication. Additionally, pharmacies receive payment directly from the patient or third-party payers through the patient's insurer. Pharmacists may monitor medication and treatment plan adherence, but this often falls to the original prescriber or the healthcare team. Some pharmacists may notify prescribers when patients fail to pick up their prescriptions, and they may provide longitudinal follow-up, but that's not historically a part of traditional pharmacy. As you can see here, The drug procurement, you have your drug manufacturer that provides to the wholesaler or the specialty distributor, which provides the medication to your traditional pharmacy. You have your pharmacy, the oncology care team that provides the prescription and that also does the monitoring for the patients. And then in the middle, in the yellow box, it's kind of hard to see, but the community pharmacy responsibilities basically lie on the clinical services, including drug utilization review, patient education, submitting prescription claims, and then the actual dispensing process. So this compared with the specialty pharmacy flow. Next slide, please. So the specialty pharmacy actually interacts directly with the providers, patients, and payers on a routine basis. They may assume roles in monitoring several aspects of the patient's therapy, including medication adherence, medication therapy management, assessing medication therapy side effects, evaluating medication efficacy, encouraging medication adherence through prescription refill reminders. Specialty pharmacy may also coordinate information with providers regarding changes in treatment and medication dose modifications. Also, they may monitor the use through prior authorization mechanisms, develop customized guidelines for use of drugs in a specialty class, and undertake measurements of clinical and financial outcomes. So if you look at the little graphic on the side, the main difference to point out here is that the drug procurement still stays the same. However, the specialty pharmacy, the clinical services that it provides, the assessment, monitoring, patient education, all of that is a day-to-day part of the specialty pharmacy. In addition to just dispensing with community pickup, we also have a potential mail order option as well. The other thing to notice is that when the care team or the oncology care team provides the prescription, they definitely continue with the monitoring for adherence and outcomes. But again, some of that responsibility also lies on the specialty pharmacy team. All right, next slide. So we've discussed some impacts of specialty pharmacy. I want to go on to discuss some challenges and some trends. But before we do that, let's stop for our final poll everywhere question. And which of the following are not challenges for specialty pharmacy? A, performance-based contracting. B, complex, high-cost care. C, limited distribution. D, fair market value. Or E, all of the above are challenges. And I don't think you guys need too much time. It seems like everyone's kind of agreed on the answer. And yes, that is correct. All of the above are definitely challenges that a specialty pharmacy faces. Next slide, please. So Bert Zwigenhoft, the president of the National Association of Specialty Pharmacy, or the NASP, he moderated a panel discussion at the 13th Annual MHA Business Summit. The panel used this opportunity to address some specific challenges facing specialty pharmacy. And like we discussed, definitely fair market value, performance-based contracting, complex, high-cost care, limited distribution, unique, and besides those, actually unique challenges also face the hospital-based specialty pharmacy. And then we'll kind of talk about how to make a hospital specialty pharmacy a little bit more attractive to payers. Next slide. All right, so to kind of start off with the fair market value. So fair market value basically is a fee-for-service model. It is difficult to define and determine its importance in placing a value or price on many services that specialty pharmacies provide. Determining core services versus enhanced is a challenge, and that's what makes fair market value such a challenge for specialty pharmacy. The second topic, the performance-based contracting, it's becoming an increasingly more common tool for setting payments for specialty pharmacy services. Payers will not fully reimburse if clinical or data reporting outcomes are not achieved. Also, for performance-based contracting to work optimally, data aggregation and reporting is really important, but that could be a barrier to smaller, newer specialty pharmacies. Finally, we have complex, or not finally, but next we have complex, high-cost care. So specialty pharmacy providers, they need to achieve high rates of medication adherence. So given the high cost of these specialty medications, manufacturers want proof from providers that patients are taking their medications, and they want to know that the efficacy for specialty drugs is cited in clinical trials is replicated in the real-world clinical setting. Next slide. So in addition to that, limited distribution is also a challenge. We've discussed this a little bit, but many providers are closed out of specialty drug networks. It is difficult for smaller specialty pharmacies to obtain access to some of these specialty medications. And this, in turn, can result in fragmented care and even greater chance of polypharmacy for patients. Even with that, with those challenges, there is one upside, and maybe more for manufacturers for the limited distribution. But drugs that are highly complex, that have a high degree of sensitivity around their use, and that require considerable clinical oversight, when they're limited, it makes it a little bit easier in the sense that there's less providers that need to be monitored for multiple levels of compliance. So, challenges facing a hospital-based specialty pharmacy. First of all, high cost of specialty medications. As we discussed, by definition, it's typically over $600 for a fill, but most are over $2,000 per fill. Also, there's fewer than 2% of the patient population that requires these medications, so there's not a lot of demand for these high-priced drugs. Also, they have complex administration and compliance issues. Also, manufacturers may choose to limit specialty drug distribution, as we talked about before. In addition to manufacturers, payers also like to restrict drugs to certain pharmacies that they require as primary or preferred. So how can we make a hospital specialty pharmacy more attractive to payers? First, investing in IT and data analytics to track and report data and outcomes as required by payers. Secondly, achieving accreditation from at least 2 of the accrediting bodies mentioned below, as URAC, ACHC, CPPA, and Joint Commission. Definitely makes a specialty pharmacy stand out. It proves to the payers, to the manufacturers, that this pharmacy has been dedicated to patient satisfaction and to healthcare. All right, next. So we discussed some challenges in specialty pharmacy. So let's talk about some trends in specialty pharmacy. So there's definitely continued growth with specialty medications, with an estimated 43% global spending by 2027. Among this, oncolytics will be one of the biggest contributors to drug spending, including treatment through cell therapy, RNA therapy, and immuno-oncology treatment. Due to the significantly high cost of these specialty medications, payers will need to find a way to cover the specialty medications. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, there's a possibility that specialty drugs may be categorized as a separate benefit under your prescription coverage, thus to enable payers to gain better control over their costs. Next slide. So in conclusion, to say that specialty pharmacy is growing is a bit of an understatement. It is probably one of the fastest growing segments of drug spending under the pharmacy benefits umbrella. Specialty pharmacy benefits not only patients, but also providers, manufacturers, and payers. Retrospective studies have shown improvement in patient adherence when medication is dispensed by a specialty pharmacy, especially one that's a health system specialty pharmacy. Also, specialty pharmacies liaise with providers to facilitate the benefits investigation process by providing insurance support, such as prior authorization referrals and high copay assistance for patients. And as more and more specialty medications become available, specialty pharmacies play an essential role in providing appropriate channels to help patients navigate challenges in obtaining and adhering to specialty medications, as well as providing clinical support for these rare and complex disease states. Next slide. And so these are just some of the resources that I used for my presentation. Next slide. And so just wanted to say thank you to everyone for listening in as part of the CE presentation today. I really appreciate your time. And if there's any questions from anybody, I am more than happy to take a stab at it now.
Great, Dr. Acharya, thank you so much. I'm just going to check because these questions are moderated, so I'll be looking and we'll be loading those up. And we actually already have a question. That's great. I want to encourage everyone in our audience to please go ahead and share your questions through Poll Everywhere now, and we'll get to as many of those as possible. First question: working as an oral chemo compliance nurse for many years, I've become familiar with many different specialty pharmacies. So I have my favorites, and then have a couple of, I cringe when I found out my patient's insurance is dictating that they have to use. Is there a proper way to report pharmacies when a situation is handled poorly or mistakes are happening often? Boy, great question. Dr. Acharya?
Yeah, no, definitely a great question. So there's definitely different avenues you can take. And to be honest, I'm not sure if the accrediting bodies, because they do look into customer and patient satisfaction scores. So definitely calling into that pharmacy and giving your feedback is crucial. Also, there's probably other avenues to report directly to, possibly to the patient, can report to the benefits investigator, to their benefits team if they have, poor service. I'm not sure if there's other ways to do that. I can definitely look into that for you. But like I said, definitely providing feedback to the specialty pharmacy themselves is definitely a way to go. And like I said, they are required, if they're accredited, to tally those scores and kind of provide, their outcomes results to the accrediting body.
Gotcha. Thank you so much. Well, we do have time for some more questions, so we'll be watching for those. Encourage our audience to submit those. While we're waiting, let me ask, what is the prevalence of specialty pharmacies in North Carolina? Are we likely to find them all over the state? Are there some rural areas where they'd be less accessible? If you can speak to that.
Sure, yeah. So the good thing about specialty pharmacies, and most of us we do mail order. So even if you're in a rural setting in North Carolina, you still have access to specialty medications. I think it may be more important to make sure that your providers that are writing for these prescriptions are aware of the pharmacies and what their capabilities are. But there's there's at least a few pharmacies in North Carolina. Of course, UNC Specialty Services. We have our shared services. We have our specialty pharmacy. Biologics is also based out of North Carolina. But as far as, like I said, for patients and having access to specialty medications, because it is a delivery-based service, and UPS, FedEx, whichever courier they decide to use, these medications are very readily available to anyone in any part of the state.
Great. Thank you so much. And it looks like we just had another one come in. All right, here we go. I currently receive one medication via specialty pharmacy, but never realized the magnitude of a specialty pharmacy. The only thing I've known is that I have to receive the medication through the specialty pharmacy. So, given this presentation, what should I do as a patient to make sure that I am taking advantage of the full benefits of the service? Another great question.
Yeah, really good question there too. So as as a patient, you definitely have the right to call a pharmacist with any questions regarding side effects, monitoring, therapy management. The clinical staff there is there to help you if your medication has issues with the insurance, needing prior approval, if you have a high copay. The specialty pharmacies are set up to sort of have all these components all into one. So you should not have to, go to different resources to kind of get these benefits. So once the prescription is sent over for you, again, if your insurance requires certain criteria, the specialty pharmacy will reach out to your provider to get the clinical information needed to get the medication approved. If there's a high copay and if you qualify for it, there will be a team that will also help you manage and navigate that. As well as once all that is determined and the benefits investigation is completed, a pharmacist will call you to go over your medication, talk about the side effects, how to properly take your medication. They will do a thorough, check with all your other medications, make sure there's no side effects. So there's definitely all those, but also outside of that, if you have any clinical questions, as I mentioned in my slide previously, a lot of these specialty pharmacies, or all of them, would have at least access to a clinical care person, whether it's a pharmacist, a nurse, that could answer your clinical questions. If you had any side effects, any urgent questions outside of business hours, they do have 24-hour access to a pharmacist.
Great. Thank you so much. And I know we're running out of time. Let me just briefly ask, given the importance of clinical trials, is there any research to show the relationship between clinical trials and specialty pharmacies?
I don't know, because clinical trials, they typically will have their own avenue of how they're getting their medications. So honestly, I'm not sure if there's going to be anything there. I can look into.
That is all right, and I understand that may fall outside of this. Well, thank you so much. We have a thank you from the audience, and we don't have any further questions. So we'll go on and do a few remarks that we need to wrap up. I want to say thank you first and foremost to the people of North Carolina for their generous support of the University Cancer Research Fund and the UNC Lineberger Comprehensive Cancer Center. We want to thank our team, Veni Obore, John Powell, Oliver Marth, Andrew Dodson, Patrick Muscarella, Lindsay Reich, and Barbara Walsh. Each of them works hard on these lectures, a lot of behind-the-scenes work, and we say thanks to all of them.